Imagine doing exactly what your doctor, your mayor, and the local government are all begging you to do.
Right, like leaving the car at home.
Yeah, you leave the car at home, you get on a bicycle to commute, you're getting some exercise, doing your part to save the planet. But according to the latest data,
And it is pretty shocking data.
it really is. The moment you leave your driveway, you are stepping into this safety gap that has been silently and dangerously widening for a decade.
It's the fundamental contradiction of modern urban life right now. I mean, we're heavily pushing this 21st century mobility revolution onto, well, a 20th century infrastructure system, and the cracks are really starting to show.
And we finally have the numbers to prove it. So today's deep dive is centered on a landmark report that just dropped in April 2026 from the European Transport Safety Council, or the ETSC.
Right, it's titled Improving the Safety of Cycling in Europe, and we're looking at that along with all the underlying data from their press release.
Exactly. And our mission today is to really look at this widening safety gap. We are going to dig into the hidden data, and I mean truly hidden behind how and why cyclists are getting hurt. Plus, we'll look at the actual physics of it all and the surprising tech being deployed to fix it.
And we really need to look closely at this because the numbers in this report force us to entirely rethink what safe actually means on a city street.
So let's get right into the raw numbers, because I have to be honest, I found this incredibly frustrating. We're looking at the decade from 2014 to 2024.
Yes, that 10-year span.
Right. And in that time, if you were a motorized road user, driving a car or a truck, deaths fell by 2% every single year.
Which is great progress for cars.
Definitely. And pedestrian deaths, they plummeted by a massive 31% overall. But cyclist deaths, over that entire 10-year period, they fell by a mere 8%.
Yeah, that is just an average of 0.5% a year.
Which is nothing.
It really is. And it tells us that whatever we are doing to make the roads safer, it is almost exclusively benefiting the people inside the 2-ton metal boxes, not the people on the bikes.
Right.
Just to put a sharp point on it, in 2024 alone, 1,926 cyclists died on EU roads. Cyclists now make up a full 10% of all road deaths.
And if the EU wants to hit its target of having road decks by 2030, a 0.5% drop a year is nowhere near enough. I mean, they need a 6.5% annual reduction.
Exactly. We are way off pace.
But wait, looking at the breakdown by country, I was genuinely confused here. The mortality rates per capita are just all over the place. Like Norway and the UK have fewer than 2 cyclist deaths per million inhabitants.
Right. Very low numbers.
But the Netherlands, they have 15 deaths per million. So just looking at this, is the Netherlands a total death trap for cyclists?
Well, it absolutely looks that way if you only look at per capita data. But that is actually a complete illusion. Think about how much the Dutch actually use their bikes compared to the rest of the world.
Oh, okay, right. I guess it's like if I looked at a map of injuries and said a ski resort is the most dangerous place in the world for broken legs.
That's a great way to look at it.
Like, it's not inherently more dangerous than a desert. It's just where everyone is actually doing the activity. The raw number of broken legs doesn't tell you the risk of the sport. It just tells you where all the skiers are.
Precisely. You have to account for exposure. You have to measure the risk by the distance actually traveled. In the Netherlands, the average person cycles about 1,000 kilometers a year.
Wow. 1,000 kilometers.
Yeah, it's not just a hobby there. It is a deeply ingrained utility for young children, teens, the elderly, everyone. So when you adjust the data to measure deaths per billion kilometers cycled, that illusion vanishes.
I see.
The Netherlands sits at 15 deaths per billion kilometers, and Sweden, which has a very low per capita death rate, sits right next to it at 13 deaths per billion kilometers.
Okay, let's unpack this. So the actual risk, kilometer for kilometer, is almost identical between the two.
Exactly, and what this really highlights is the core underlying issue of this entire report. As cycling levels increase, the sheer volume of riders is exposing the flaws in the system.
Because the infrastructure hasn't scaled to protect all those new riders.
Right. And because the death rate is stagnating, it forces researchers to look at a much darker blind spot. I'm talking about the injuries that aren't even making it into the official statistics.
Oh, right. Because if the mortality data can be that skewed just by how we measure exposure, the injury data must be a complete mess.
It is.
The report mentions that in 2024, nearly 34,000 cyclists were reported seriously injured in the EU 21. And that is actually an increase of 12% since 2014.
But here's the thing. That 34,000 figure, that is literally just the tip of the iceberg.
Wait, really?
Yeah. The reality is that official police databases, which, by the way, is where city planners historically get all their safety data, they are capturing only about 10% of the actual injured cyclists.
Hold on, just 10%. How is it possible that 90% of serious injuries are just missing?
Well, we finally know this thanks to Sweden. Back in 2021, Sweden changed their law to mandate that hospitals must report traffic injury data to a national database called Strata.
Okay, so before that, it was mostly voluntary.
Exactly. Hospital reporting was largely voluntary, so the government relied on police reports. But once it became mandatory for doctors to log these injuries, the true scale of the crisis was exposed almost overnight.
The discrepancy is mind-blowing. The Swedish police reported around 2,700 injured cyclists for 2024. But the Swedish hospitals, they reported over 16,000.
And the ETSC report notes that similar massive data gaps exist in Belgium, Ireland, and France.
But why? Why are the police missing tens of thousands of broken bones?
It comes down to our assumptions about what a crash actually is.
Crap.
We naturally assume a serious cycling accident involves getting hit by a car. But at least 28% of cyclist deaths and the vast majority of serious injuries are what are called single bicycle crashes.
So nobody else is involved. It's just the rider and the environment.
Right. We are talking about hitting a hidden pothole, slipping on an icy patch, maybe getting a narrow tire caught in a tram rail, or just falling off a steep curb. I mean, if you wipe out on a slippery tram rail and break your collarbone, what do you do?
Well, I'm certainly not going to sit there on the pavement bleeding, waiting 45 minutes for a police patrol car to come take my statement. I'm going straight to the emergency room.
Exactly. You go to the hospital. A doctor sets your bone. But because no motor vehicle was involved, the police are never called.
Wow.
Therefore, the crash technically never happened in the eyes of the city's transport department.
That is terrifying from an infrastructure perspective.
Yeah?
Like if I'm an urban planner trying to redesign a street, I'm flying completely blind.
You really are.
I might spend millions of euros redesigning an intersection just because 2 cars scraped their bumpers there last year and a police report was filed.
Yes.
While completely ignoring a badly designed stretch of bike lane 2 streets over where 50 people have silently broken their wrists.
That is exactly the systemic failure this report highlights. Without integrating that hospital data, you just cannot fix the built environment. But, the environment is only half the equation here.
Right, there's the human element.
Yeah, the demographics of who is riding are fundamentally changing, and technology is playing a massive role in that.
So let's look at who is actually getting hurt. The demographics are shifting drastically. First, the gender split. 80% of cyclists killed are male.
Which mostly comes down to exposure and behavioral patterns. Men typically travel longer distances on rural roads where the vehicle speeds are much higher, and they historically engage in riskier behaviors.
What kind of behaviors?
Things like bungee riding in large groups, or even cycling under the influence.
But the age demographic was the real curveball for me. 51% of cyclists killed in the EU are aged 65 or over.
Right.
More than half of all fatalities are seniors.
And this brings us squarely to the e-bike paradox. Look, e-bikes are an undeniably incredible piece of technology.
Oh, for sure.
They are keeping older populations mobile. They allow seniors to get groceries, visit friends, and stay active much later in life. But the data shows a really grim divergence. While conventional bicycle deaths are generally falling, e-bike deaths are rising.
The stat from the Netherlands really hammered this home for me. Head injuries, specifically for e-bike riders, rose 86% between 2020 and 2024.
It's a huge spike.
What is it about the e-bike that changes the math so drastically?
Well, it's a combination of velocity, mass, and human biology. An e-bike doesn't just assist you. It introduces sustained higher speeds on a vehicle that is significantly heavier because of the battery and the motor.
Right, those bikes are heavy.
Exactly. Now, put a rider on that heavy, fast vehicle who may have decreasing natural balance, slower reaction times, and increased physical fragility.
That makes sense.
When a crash happens, even a single bike crash where they just lose their balance, the impact is much harder. And an older body simply cannot absorb that kinetic energy the way a 20-year-old body can.
But it's not just older folks pushing the limits of e-bikes, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have to talk about what's happening with teenagers, specifically this fat bike phenomenon in the Netherlands.
Yes, the fat bikes. These are essentially heavy e-bikes designed with wide saddles, thick motorcycle-style tires, and a very robust frame. And they have become immensely popular with kids, specifically that 12 to 17-year-old demographic.
And the report points out that the problem isn't necessarily the bikes themselves, it's what the kids are doing to them.
Right, the modification.
Yeah, they are buying illegal speed boosting kits online. The Dutch authorities, the ILT, actually seized 16,500 of these illegally modified fat bikes recently.
Because they are being modified to bypass the factory speed limiters.
Yeah.
So they stop functioning like bicycles and start functioning like unregistered mopeds.
It's like putting a sports car engine into a golf cart. The brakes, the frame, the tires, none of it is designed to handle those speeds safely, let alone in the hands of a 14-year-old weaving through traffic. But it poses a huge question for cities. Is the answer to ban the tech? Or do we have to redesign the streets to handle the fact that this tech actually exists?
It's the ultimate planner's dilemma. Technology is always going to outpace infrastructure. If you have a conventional pedal cyclist doing 15 kilometers an hour, an elderly person on a heavy e-bike doing 25, and a teenager on a speed-boosted fat bike doing 35.
Sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It is, and if they are all sharing a narrow, unprotected, painted lane next to cars, the system will inevitably break down.
Which brings us to the actual physics of the solution. Because as much as those single bike crashes account for the injuries, when we talk about actual fatalities, the report is absolutely definitive.
Yeah.
65% of cyclist deaths involve a motor vehicle.
Right, and if you break that 65% down, 44% are passenger cars and 9% are heavy goods vehicles like trucks. This is where the industry relies on something called the safe system approach.
Right, the safe system. It's basically a framework that accepts human beings are going to make mistakes, so the system needs to be designed so that those mistakes don't result in death.
Yes, that's the core philosophy.
And the absolute golden rule of the safe system is that vulnerable road users,
Yeah.
Cyclists, pedestrians, and motor vehicles should not mix at speeds over 30 kilometers per hour.
Yes. Physical separation isn't possible. Like, if you can't build a dedicated curbed bike lane, then the speed limit must be strictly enforced at 30 kilometers per hour.
But people hate that.
Yeah.
I mean, you hear it in city council meetings everywhere. People complain endlessly about 30-kilometer-per-hour limits being rolled out in urban centers. It's constantly framed as a war on cars.
I know it's a highly emotive topic, but from a safety engineering perspective, it is purely about the biological limits of the human body. It is an acknowledgement of mass and velocity. The risk of death for a cyclist hit by a car at 50 kilometers per hour is exponentially higher than if they are hit at 30. At 50, human bones and organs simply cannot absorb the kinetic energy of a 2-ton vehicle. It's not ideological. It is physics.
Especially because cars are getting larger and heavier. The report specifically mentions this. A modern SUV with a 90-centimeter high bonnet increases the risk of a fatal injury to a cyclist by 30% compared to a car with a bonnet that is just 10 centimeters lower.
And why is that?
Because that higher front end strikes the cyclist high on their body, crushing the torso and vital organs instead of striking the legs.
Exactly. And to manage these shifting variables, bigger cars, faster bikes, we are seeing incredible new methodologies being piloted. There is a system mentioned in the report called CycleWrap.
Right, CycleWrap. It's being piloted in places like Barcelona and Madrid. But how does that actually work on the ground?
It's essentially a massive high-tech audit of the physical environment. So instead of waiting for crashes to happen, they use specialized equipment, often cameras and sensors mounted on bicycles or vehicles, to literally scan the road network. They evaluate crash risk using over 50 different determinants.
Wait, what kind of determinants?
Things a human might miss. The exact angle of an intersection, the height of a curb, the friction of the road surface, even the width of a painted line relative to the speed of adjacent traffic.
Wow.
Yeah, it allows planners to proactively generate a heat map of where the infrastructure is hostile to cyclists before anyone actually gets hurt.
That is brilliant. And we are also seeing major shifts on the vehicle technology side to prevent these collisions, right? Like, as of July 2024, new EU rules mandate that all new vehicles have to be equipped with ISA, which is Intelligent Speed Assistance, and AEB, Automated Emergency Braking, specifically with cyclist detection.
Let's unpack the AEB, because the cyclist detection element is relatively new and it's crucial. Early emergency braking systems were great at detecting the massive flat back of another car.
Right, big target.
Exactly. But a cyclist is a narrow, unpredictable shape moving laterally. Modern AEB uses a combination of radar and cameras to constantly scan the periphery. If a cyclist suddenly swerves into your path, the car reacts faster than a human foot can hit the brake pedal.
And my absolute favorite piece of new tech they mentioned is aimed at preventing dooring.
Oh, yes.
If you've ever ridden a bike in a city, your biggest fear is riding next to a row of parked cars and suddenly a driver flings their door open right into your path.
It's an incredibly common crash and usually results in the cyclist being thrown directly into the active traffic lane. But Euro NCAPT, the organization that gives cars their safety star ratings, is now explicitly rewarding manufacturers for including anti-dooring technology.
How does the car actually stop you from opening the door, though?
It ties into the car's blind spot radar, so when you park and turn off the engine, the radar stays active for a few minutes. If you reach for the door handle while a cyclist is approaching from behind, the car will either blast a loud, audible warning, or in some advanced models, an electronic lock will physically prevent the door from opening for a few seconds until the cyclist passes.
That feels like science fiction in the best way. Okay, so we can fix the roads with data, we can slow down the cars, we can make the cars smart enough to lock their own doors. But what about the rider?
The human element again.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because environmental control is great, but human behavior is still a massive variable.
Absolutely. And the report tackles personal responsibility head-on. They focus heavily on two main things: intoxication and protective gear. Let's talk about drink cycling first. We have massive public awareness campaigns about drink driving, but cycling under the influence is a silent epidemic.
The data from Finland was shocking. They looked at intoxicated cyclists who were killed over a 5-year period. 15 out of 18 of them were under the influence of alcohol.
It's a staggering proportion.
And yet, the rules across Europe are wildly inconsistent. If you are in Czechia, the blood alcohol limit for cyclists is an absolute 0. You cannot have a drop. But in Germany, you can legally ride a bike with a blood alcohol concentration of 1.6 grams per liter.
Which is an incredibly high level of intoxication. It severely impairs your reaction time, your spatial awareness, and your equilibrium.
Yeah, you need all of those.
Especially equilibrium. Balance is the single most critical faculty you need to operate a two-wheeled vehicle safely. But when we talk about rider behavior, the biggest debate is always around helmets.
Well, the baseline numbers are undisputed. The report cites meta-analyses showing that wearing a helmet reduces head injuries by 51% and fatal head injuries by 72%.
But the report goes deeper. It raises a really fascinating question. Are the helmets you and I buy actually tested for the way we crash in the real world?
This part really got me. Folksam, an insurance group out of Sweden, found this massive glaring flaw in how the EU legally tests bicycle helmets.
Right, the standard test.
Yeah, the EN1078. To get that safety sticker on the box, the helmet only has to survive being dropped straight down onto a flat surface or a curb anvil.
But think about the physics of a bicycle crash. You are almost never stationary, just dropping straight down. You have forward momentum. When you crash, you hit the ground at an angle.
It's like if you tested a smartphone case just by dropping it perfectly flat on its back, sure, the screen doesn't break in the lab. But in real life, you fumble it, it hits the concrete on the corner, and the glass shatters.
That's a perfect analogy.
The flat drop test completely ignores the reality of the fall.
Exactly. And when a helmet hits the asphalt at a forward angle, the helmet grips the road, but your head wants to keep moving. This creates something called rotational acceleration.
Ouch.
Yeah, your skull violently twists. Your brain, which is essentially suspended in fluid, sloshes and twists inside the skull. That shearing force is what causes severe concussions and traumatic brain strain.
But the standard EU test doesn't check for that at all.
No. Which is why Folksam had to introduce their own oblique impact testing to measure that rotational force. Because consumers were buying helmets with official safety stickers, completely unaware that the helmet might not protect them from the most common type of traumatic brain injury.
And the testing failures extend to the new types of bikes, too. The report highlights crash tests done by De Croo in Germany on cargo bikes.
Ah, right, those long bikes with the big bucket in the front.
Yeah, the ones parents use to pedal their kids to school. Well, they put a dummy child in the bucket without a seatbelt and ran a test at just 25 kilometers per hour.
And 25 kilometers per hour sounds leisurely, but the physics are brutal. When the rider slammed on the brakes, the child dummy was violently launched entirely out of the cargo bucket.
It just underscores that as bicycles evolve to carry heavy cargo and actual passengers at sustained motor-assisted speeds, our definition of a bike accessory has to evolve into actual vehicle safety standards.
It really does.
Seatbelts in a bike bucket sound crazy until you see the crash test dummy fly through the air. Okay, to wrap up this deep dive, we started with a fundamental contradiction. Cycling is the ultimate tool for a clean, modern city. But that 8% stagnation in death reduction over a decade It proves that we are trying to run 21st century mobility on 20th century infrastructure.
We really are.
If we actually want to solve this, we desperately need better data. Planners need those hospital records, not just police reports. We have to accept the physics of 30-kilometer-per-hour zones. We need helmet tests that account for rotational impact, and we have to reckon with the reality of heavy, fast e-bikes sharing the lane.
The main takeaway is that safety cannot be an afterthought. If governments want you to commute by bicycle, they have a systemic obligation to build an environment that expects and forgives human error.
And this matters to you, whether you are a daily commuter braving the bike lane, a weekend e-biker, or someone exclusively driving a car just trying not to hit anyone.
It affects all of us.
It does. These invisible systems, the speed limits, the missing strata data, the hidden tech in a car door, the testing standards on your kid's helmet, they dictate your safety every single time you leave your front door.
It is entirely a shared ecosystem.
It really is. Which leaves us with this one final provocative thought. We have spent the last 100 years engineering our cities to keep cars safe from each other. Wide lanes, metal guardrails, clear zones. But if we truly want to have road deaths by 2030, maybe the next frontier of vehicle safety isn't just about making cars and bikes smarter.
What is it then?
Maybe it is about fundamentally unlearning who we believe owns the city street in the first place.
Virtual's me.